I will do a sound check to make sure that Mr. Nolan can hear us as well, and that we can hear Mr. Nolan. Thank you, Mr. Nolan. My apologies, it is a little late starting. It is 6:31 now, and I'd like to welcome everyone who's with us this evening to the Wednesday, May 14th, 2025 Planning and Zoning Commission for the City of Brentwood. We do not have a quorum tonight, so this will not be a meeting where we can conduct official business, and that does include taking votes on things as simple as our agenda and our approval of the minutes. But in the interest of making good use of the time of the folks here, we would like to hear at least a little bit of informative not testimony, but just some information on some of the reports and recommendations that are coming forward. Again, we won't be able to take any action on this tonight, but hopefully we'll familiarize the commissioners and others, anyone watching, about what these plans are. So with that, I will, however, say that we can do the Pledge of Allegiance. So I'll call us to order and we'll do that. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, justice for all. I do believe we can still call the roll. All right. Jessica, would you mind, since I think it's important for you to have that rather than me, but.
Chair Hart Nelson,
Here.
Jeff Hunt,
Here.
Mr. Brian Nolan,
Here.
Carl Carlin,
Here.
and that is roll.
Thank you very much. Again, as I mentioned, we won't be able to approve the agenda, the minutes, or citizen comments. We have no old business. And moving forward to new business as a informational only, we'll be looking at the presentation of the draft residential design guidelines by H3C Studio. If you could, sir, please give us your name, and we have the presentation. We look forward to hearing about this.
Thank you, Chair. My name is Tim Bryhan with H3 Studio. We are the city's planning consultant on the architectural design guidelines project. So what I'd like to present to you tonight, we have developed the final draft of the residential architectural design guidelines for the city. And I'd like to share sort of a brief overview of the project, including some of the engagement activities that have been undertaken to complete this draft. The full draft has been circulated to the P&Z and the Architectural Review Board, is my understanding. And so we'll kind of run through the contents and organization of the guidelines, not necessarily every single guideline one by one, but just kind of give an overview to show what topics the guidelines are covering, with a little bit of a more in-depth presentation on a few issues. And then another piece of this, from the outset of the project, the city asked us to, in addition to developing the guidelines, also to identify recommended zoning code text amendments that would help to further the successful administration of the guidelines in terms of realizing the types, the physical form of development in the city that are desired based on the community input. And so we've developed some draft language around recommended zoning code text amendments that are included in this deliverable, this draft deliverable, for consideration at a future date. And Whitney, I don't know, do you want me to talk a little bit about what the anticipated next steps are, or do you want to deal with that? Okay, so what we've discussed. In fact, we had a meeting earlier this afternoon with Whitney and Jessica. In terms of the next steps, we are hoping to get any sort of final comments or input after tonight's presentation. And assuming that there are no major issues with what's been developed to date, this is essentially ready to go forward for consideration for adoption as an addendum to the city's comprehensive plan. And I believe that Whitney is planning to call a joint meeting of the Planning and Zoning Commission and ARB on June 11th, at which point that would be presented for consideration. So.
If I could also to note that we do have, and I apologize for not doing this earlier, Mr. Paul Turner, who is one of the members of the ARB, as well as Mr. Carlin, who has dual duty on both P&Z and with the ARB. So my apologies for not mentioning at the start.
So the overall objective for the project is to develop citywide residential architectural design guidelines for all residential properties in Brentwood, as well as commercial architectural design guidelines for Brentwood Boulevard and the West Manchester corridor. And the guidelines are intended to provide consistent direction to ARB in the review and approval of projects, clearly define the review and approval process between what the ARB reviews and approves and what city staff can review and approve administratively, provide legal backup to the review and approval decisions of ARB and city staff, clarify requirements and expectations of property owners and developers, and address persistent design review issues faced by city staff and ARB. So for the residential guidelines specifically, the community engagement activities that have contributed to the development of these include 2 meetings with the project steering committee for their review and input, plus independent review by the steering committee members of the draft residential design guidelines. We also met with several of the boards and commissions and gave informational presentations on the process and information gathering early on. That included a meeting with the Sustainability Commission, the Planning and Zoning Commission, the Architectural Review Board. And finally, back in December, we had a public open house that was dedicated to the residential design guidelines, where we were able to get feedback from residents and other stakeholders in Brentwood. Just for informational purposes, this is the roster of the project steering committee. So it consists of some key city staff, the mayor, and then representatives from the Sustainability Commission, ARB, and Planning and Zoning. So I know for some of you here tonight, you've seen this multiple times so far. Starting out, of course, in the project, we looked at some existing conditions analysis citywide, including the current zoning districts focused on the single-family residential A and B districts, and then obviously also the commercial districts in light of the commercial guidelines. And fundamentally, there are some other kind of special overlays that impact these. From a residential standpoint, there are several subdivisions, of course, which have indentures or deed restrictions which guide building design. Typically, these are more restrictive than the architectural design guidelines for residences, but of course, those are not administered or enforced by the city. We've also looked at, for the commercial side, the Manchester Corridor MC zoning district design guidelines as sort of an organizational model. And then moving back to the commercial side, the Brentwood 2020 comp plan focus areas, which include Brentwood Boulevard south of Strassner Drive and the West Manchester corridor, are the primary focus of the commercial study. Coming out of the analysis, there were a number of consensus issues and opportunities that were identified, which these guidelines seek to address. That includes a lack of a defined checklist for residential submittals, which increases difficulty and uncertainty for owners, staff, and the ARB. We heard from ARB that they don't always feel fully empowered to deny projects because of a lack of defined guidelines. Commercial projects today are not required to be reviewed by ARB, only the Planning and Zoning Commission. There was some talk about looking at floor area ratios within the zoning code to govern building size. That currently does not exist in Brentwood. It is expected that Brentwood will continue to experience teardowns and rebuilds due to increasing property value, which highlights the increasing need for the guidelines. Some more specific issues, currently only replacement in kind and installation of solar panels can be administratively approved by staff for residential projects. So that was something that the guidelines are going to address. The subdivision indentures and deed restrictions, again, are more restrictive, but there's no defined process for enforcement of these requirements, and we understand that that is not unique to Brentwood. That is just a legal reality. And finally, we heard that there is a lack of clear direction about sustainable building systems and site treatments, and when and where those can be employed in projects. So that's sort of a summary of some of the topics that both the residential design guidelines and the commercial design guidelines are going to be addressing. So moving into the residential design guidelines and sort of the overall contents and organization. So they start with a section on the purpose and administration, the purpose being defined as to not prescribe specific architectural styles, materials, or required details, but rather to encourage and facilitate homeowners and developers to design homes that are compatible with the existing homes around them. So we wanted to be very clear up front that, you know, this is not about making every home in Brentwood look the same. We feel that, and the ARB feels that freedom of design is important in the community, but that compatibility of design is equally important. And so that is what these guidelines are intended to achieve. In the administration section, there is a detailed section dealing with ARB review procedures. And then one of the things that is new to this is our definitions around administrative review. So the guidelines currently state that the following project types can have administrative review by the Department of Planning and Development. That would be open air structures without roofs, including pergolas and trellises, either freestanding or attached to a building, manufactured sunrooms and screened porches, as long as they're installed on the rear facade of a home, and any other additions that are not visible from the public right-of-way, which meet the following conditions. It's not fully enclosed and air-conditioned. It does not have a full foundation, and it's less than 200 square feet. So any projects falling within those requirements, and then also meeting specific design submittal requirements, which are outlined in the draft, can be reviewed and approved by city staff. And of course, the guidelines are also explicit that at city staff's discretion, they can always refer any project to ARB for review if they feel it requires ARB review.
You may get to this. Can I ask a question? And it's showing my ignorance here. Would decks be included in this? Are those included now? We've had.
Those are not included right now. If it doesn't have a roof structure, that's just staff review.
Okay.
So, yeah.
So it currently is just staff review.
Yeah.
That's what I wanted to check on. Thank you.
The second section talks about some general architectural design principles that the guidelines themselves provide more requirements on. And so this section, I'm going to run through this in a little bit more detail because this does contain some of the specific requirements of the guidelines themselves. So starting with roof forms, the roof form should be compatible with the architectural style of the house and harmonious with other homes on the block, and overly complex roof forms should be avoided. Front garages are a big issue in Brentwood, and the guidelines state that the garage entrance may be flush with the front facade or recessed back, but should not project forward of the front facade, and that the combined total width of all garage doors should not be more than 40% of the total width of the front facade, subject to a couple of exceptions that are outlined in the guidelines themselves, which I can go into if you have questions about that. And then a requirement to use architectural garage doors with windows and carriage door style hardware compatible with the overall design and architectural style of the home. So we want to make sure that if a garage is located on the front facade, that it is actually it's not an overwhelming feature to the home, and it's designed in a way that does not in any way detract from the overall style and design of the home. Window and door trims, another big issue. The guidelines talk about how all windows and doors should have exterior trim trim boards on houses with siding and brick mold on brick houses. Porch design should be compatible and harmonious with the architectural style of the home. Porches may be located on any facade. Open wood or composite planks used on decks are not appropriate for porch floors. Fixed screen panels should not be permitted on front porches. And in general, wood porches should be finished in opaque paint. There are, again, some exceptions to that based on materials. If someone wanted to do a stained front porch, for example, or stained front porch columns, which are detailed in the guidelines themselves.
Can I ask one more if I could,
Yeah.
going to garages, again, showing that I'm not the architect, Mr. Turner, and Mr. Carlin knows that well. Is this a conforming diagram with that front garage? Because that does not appear to be flush with the facade.
No, that is a good point, yes. And,
Okay.
and we found, we modeled this is an actual house in Brentwood, a new construction home. I don't remember the address offhand. It was one of the better examples that we could find of a front garage house. The one thing that I will point out about this one, the fact that the porch roof extends out to the front garage, that is listed in the guidelines as something that is a desirable feature to have in order to minimize the presence. But you have a keen eye that you pointed out that it does, in fact, extend beyond.
Not sure it's a keen eye, I'm learning something, so that's good. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Just to add to that, Paul, you may want to, typically at ARB, if there's a porch, if there's a garage in front, this is how they've revised drawings to minimize the appearance of that garage, so that's why we're just including it here too.
Yeah, a lot of times, to me, this one is not one of the ones that we don't try to encourage this. To me, if it had I wrote some notes on the copy I have. One of the things I would have said was if you have a full second floor above that garage, that's a front face. And that would be considered somewhat acceptable. A lot of times when we have one like this, a lot of the ones we've been seeing and we try to encourage the developers to do is to make that roof of the porch continuous across with a window to the bedroom upstairs, rather than it being a proud gable end. Because that then just continues to push it up. And since we have no guidelines right now, this is not, to me, my preferred in seeing in the neighborhoods. I would prefer to see a more generous porch, probably a proud porch. I think Carl might have an opinion one way or the other. There's a number of other things that I've seen, but that's...
Thank you, Mr. Turner.
Okay, thank you. So then eaves. So all homes with gabled or hipped roofs should feature eaves. So that's an overhang of the roof, and they should be compatible and harmonious with the design and architectural style of the home. Freeze bands, another facade feature, which are highlighted there. Those are encouraged on the wall at the eave line. They should be proportional to the depth of the eave and the height of the building. And it is recommended that the height of the frieze extend from the horizontal projection of the eave down to the top of the uppermost floor window openings, as this example does illustrate. And then finally, sills and water tables, sometimes referred to as like it's sort of compatible with, like you would think of wainscoting on the interior of a home. Those are encouraged. And when present, they should generally, the table lines should generally align with the sill and water table lines of neighboring homes. So then we move into the actual content, and I'm just going to sort of run through the major headings of the topics that are addressed in the guidelines. So the first major section of the guidelines deals with new home massing and placement. So again, we deal with garages first, and we separate guidelines for side and rear access garages, which are a little more permissive because they're not visible from the street, or at least not primarily visible from the street, with front access garages, which have more restrictive guidelines. Building massing, or building configuration and massing rather, deals with building orientation, building height as it relates to neighboring buildings, street-facing facades, homes located on corner lots, the primary entrance to the home, and the roof forms. Then the next section deals with additions to existing homes. And so we've basically looked at this in three different types of additions. So the first being additions that are part of the side and or rear facades. So that deals, we have guidelines dealing with their design and form, the roof form, and the materials. Then second story additions, so this would be basically adding a second story onto an existing one-story home, design and form of those. And then additions that are part of the street-facing facade, and this also deals with design and form, also with placement, roof forms, and materials. And again, additions that are part of or extend the street-facing facade of the home are treated with more scrutiny in terms of the guidelines than those that are part of a side or rear facade. Then we have the next section deals with architectural details and features. So specific guidelines pertaining to windows, doors, porches, decks. And I realize there's a typo there in the presentation. I do apologize for that. I just want to make sure what that is supposed to be. It's just a duplication. There's only 6 items, and this is not 7. So decks, architectural details, and then utility services and mechanical equipment, which includes guidelines dealing with solar panels. The next section, materials. So we have a section on permitted materials, which include face brick, stone masonry, siding, either wood or fiber cement board like hardy board, shingles, either wood, fiberglass, or cement or fiber cement, and then stucco or cement plaster, which does not include panelized or EIFS systems, but only traditional applied stucco. So those are materials that are permitted in residential construction. Prohibited materials include concrete masonry units, concrete block, whether they're split face or not, EIFS, exterior insulated facade systems, and other panelized stucco systems, architectural precast panels, which are typically made of concrete composite, fiber cement panels, so these are basically, it's the same material that the fiber cement siding is made out of, but it's in large panels. Plywood or oriented strand board siding panels, thin brick veneer, the stuff that's glued or thin set onto the facade, and asphalt shingles on walls. So those are listed as prohibited materials. And then other materials that can be approved but are subject to ARB approval include vinyl siding, aluminum siding, architectural metal panels, or glass block. And so the understanding here is that these materials may be appropriate to some buildings, but they're not, they don't just have blanket permission on any building.
If we could, just real quick, Mr. Turner, I believe you had a question.
Oh, so, I had a couple of questions. Well, let me, if I can backtrack all the way to the beginning. I just want to clarify, I'm a member of the ARB, so I will be looking at this document. And I've also designed buildings, residential ones, in Brentwood. So I also end up using the document.
Sure.
So a lot of it is unenforceable language. So, and you've said it's guidelines for us as the ARB to use. And so how do we enforce it if it's not in enforceable language? I understand that you don't want it to be a prescriptive statement of how to do things, but how do we get to enforce it if it's not enforceable? Does that make sense? Because when you say we would like this or we recommend this use, it is not actually, to me, an enforceable language.
Well, I think that part of the provisions are going to be enforceable, such as these types of materials are prohibited. So then you're going to deny any
Those are easy.
application with those
It's the
materials.
other ones that I'm
Yeah.
concerned about.
So, usually, if you put in guidance that, you know, if you have, let's say, a front-facing garage that protrudes from the house, it's not otherwise prohibited, but that if you're going to approve that, then they need to add some other architectural features, and then so you look for those. So if you're going to do this, then we should also be seeing, you know, something else.
So this, as a guideline, will be enforceable under the purview of the ARB for anything over, you know, the prescripted size of 200 square feet. And there's a couple of other stipulations earlier on.
Right,
So,
right.
so I don't, that may be in there in the language already, but I didn't catch it originally. And if that's the intent, that's fine. And I can live with the unenforceable language that's elsewhere because it's a guideline for us to use. And then for everybody else to understand that that's what we're doing too. So it's for us to review as professionals, because right now we're strictly a professional board review, meaning we're all licensed professionals to do work in architecture and construction.
And I would point, not being an attorney, so I will preface that, as I do frequently, surrounded by many attorneys and on the call. These guidelines provide both advice and requirements. And so that's the language, and that's in the beginning that I think I would look to, is there is some that is advice, and you're looking
Okay.
at the totality of what is being put in front of you, saying, does it meet the advice, or is it conflicting with the advice regularly, and requirements.
And that's one of the things that I probably missed, and that's why I wanted to clarify that that's what the intent is.
Yeah, thank you.
So back to the specific right now. So a lot of your prohibited ones, I would actually shift down to for ARB review
Okay.
because the building code requires exterior insulation as we get further forward. So for reference as well, I have been a committee member at ICC for the past 5 code cycles. And so I watched this on the development side. I was just at the 2027 adoption hearings. And so as these requirements come into the code, this contradicts them. So I would not exclude all materials outright. I will agree that concrete masonry units and plywood-oriented strand board panels are not appropriate, or asphalt shingles. The other issue is thin brick as a veneer. So is that also supposed to be encompassing all fully adhered masonry systems?
Well, this was specific, because this was added based on feedback from the public and from the steering committee. It was referring specifically to the, for lack of a better term, I'll call them the brick tiles, if you will, that are either glued on or attached with thin set to.
So again, that's kind of a misunderstanding of the actual architectural technology. And when you look at a lot of buildings that are going up right now, we get a lot of fully adhered masonry. And most of that masonry is actually precast and would be classified under the concrete category. It looks exactly like stone. And when it's put up properly, that's the caveat. If it's put up according to the building code and not put up in the old style of what people are afraid of, which we used to refer to as lick and stick. I mean, that's the way it was put up. Slap on some caulk and put it up there. That's inappropriate. And it's a construction issue, not necessarily a finish term. Does that make sense? Sure.
And I think that we've had that, and Mr. Carlin, I can't remember if it was you or Mr. Foreman, but I recall a case that came before P&Z a while ago, where there was a great deal of discussion about that construction piece, which I would worry, my concern there is that enforceable, right? Is it better to have it in a prohibited, or as you're suggesting, hey, ARB needs to look at it?
Right.
Because when it gets to the construction phase of, if they do it wrong, it's gonna look awful, is that enforceable? I think is the concern there,
and
because
I
it's
would-
already built at that point.
I would say some of it for us to review. Now, if you get lay people on the ARB eventually and decide to go that route, it's probably not, I mean, you might have to go back, but you should clarify what you mean one way or the other, because thin brick actually has ways to be adhered properly, but it can be poorly done. And it's more of a longevity issue, I think, than anything else. And the same thing with
Yeah.
stucco, so.
Sorry to interrupt. I've been following the process, obviously,
Right.
as a member of the steering committee, and also sharing, Paul's tenure on the ARB. So, and I agree with much of what's being said. I do think, the comment was just made about the sort of, licensed professional architecture nature of those of us who serve on the ARB, which I have always been in favor of. Not in the interest of excluding anybody else's opinions, but more just from the point of view of knowing the similar training and experience that we have in that capacity to be able to make these sort of determinations. So I appreciate the documents, leaving some of those decisions to that, and it won't always be me and Paul. It'll be other people in the future, other architects.
We hope so.
But yeah, right. But I appreciate the document providing that guidance, not just to us, but also to the people who are going to apply. Because, in the beginning discussions, I'll keep my comments brief. In the beginning discussions for this process, many of us noted, as architects applying to other jurisdictions that had similar documentation, local ones come to mind. And, those were helpful in terms of just, sort of setting expectations. I feel this document, as currently written, from my understanding of it, with some, discussion we're having now to help, does leave room for interpretation, both for the ARB and for people who might apply. And I think it's, at least my tenure, the three of us that I've known, there's been four or so, but it's not our goal to sort of tell people no. It's not our goal to determine the style of a building necessarily. It's more, as Paul said, there's a contextual argument. There's some property value concerns. There's other ways that the board has been empowered by the city. Because our power eventually comes from the Board of Aldermen and the mayor. And so, I guess my point is that, leaving some of that to interpretation. For instance, with thin brick, it's a detailed discussion we could go into, but there's some which are the panelized kind, which I believe we would not like to approve. There's others that, is essentially the exact same brick sheared off and applied. You can never tell the difference, right? So I think there's some room for that kind of discussion. And as long as the document protects that discussion, it allows for a range of styles and approaches appropriate to the context, then I'm in favor of it, if that makes sense.
Right, so Carl, am
Mr.
I
Carl.
correct in that some of these pieces that I would say, just move them down for us to review? I wouldn't mention, I mean, I've changed the phrasing on some of these to what are more contemporary standards, one way or the other, rather than it being and exclude this material, which is a layperson's thought, versus what are we actually using nowadays? So.
Could we do a small technical change? If it's possible to adjust Mr. Carlin's volume down a bit, it is at full blast.
It's your microphone.
I thought Zoom could do that for each individual if we're the host. Got you. Miss Kelly, if you could take a look. We don't want to mute him. That would be not what we're trying to accomplish, but just turning it down a couple
I'm working on it at this end. I'm working on it.
We will do a belt and suspenders approach. Thank you, Mr. Carlin. Apologies if, please. Oh, sorry. Ms. Turner, any more questions?
So, no, I mean, I tried to refrain from a lot of the questions I would ask, but this was kind of a section when you get into the actual, what I call enforceable language. And now that I understand the methodology of the preferred standing and it being a guideline for us as a board member, that's also fine. I mean, I'm fine with the way it's presented from that standpoint. Carl, do you have an opinion on that? I mean, you've been in more meetings than I have. Oh, now he's got you really quiet. You're really quiet.
It did, but you could probably go up 2 notches.
All right.
But we can't hear
about
you.
that?
We can hear
How
you.
about that?
Perfect.
Good for me.
Yes, Paul, and just I don't want to because we're on the ARB, we could probably hijack the whole thing. I don't want to do that.
Oh, yeah.
But I will say yes. I think the goal is to just to to help the citizens and the applicants better understand the sorts of things that we are impaneled, by code to look at, right? So I think having some understanding of that, it would definitely save some time for all involved, and that's not the main goal, but it would definitely be, I think, helpful to staff, to applicants, to have those goals, to understand, where they're headed. And many of the things that have just come up, the garage front issue, the trim issue, many of these issues come up, almost every meeting, right? And and again, it's not to be prescriptive or to have to say no to things. It's more just to say, there's a level of detail that's common among the other houses, of whatever vintage in the neighborhood. In order to maintain, a sense of context and property value, we'd like you to maintain that level of detail. How they do it is sometimes to be interpreted, right? So my feeling is that this is as much a way to give a heads up to all involved as it is to be prescriptive or to be restrictive, right? So.
And I'll put forward as well that we're going from zero to a document that we can refer to. And just as we will entertain text amendments or text changes, as we do here at P&Z, we have the opportunity to correct this if we're off base on a few things as we go down. So I appreciate that. In the interest of time, I think appreciate we can go back to the presentation.
Okay.
And knowing that, again, we unfortunately will probably have to call back to have this conversation again when we have a full quorum. But thank you very much.
Yeah. So then the materials section concludes with a section on materials for buildings on corner lots, basically specifying that if a building has two street-facing facades, both of those street-facing facades should use the same materials. Material transitions between street-facing and side or rear facades. This was actually a subject of a lot of input at the public open house. There were many folks said that having brick on the front of the building and siding on the sides of the building should be totally prohibited. That's not always realistic, but what we did say is that it's always preferred to use the same materials on the rear and side-facing facades as on the street-facing facade. But we've come to sort of a compromise that when that transition occurs, the material on the street-facing side should extend a minimum of 5 feet past the corner on the adjacent facades. And then finally, there is an exemption for material requirements for prefabricated structures. And then finally, the last section of the guidelines deals with site features and landscaping. So that includes guidelines related to retaining walls, fences, and significant trees. Then the last piece that I would like to share tonight are our recommended zoning code amendments. So early on in the process, the issue came up about placement of buildings, of particularly infill residential buildings relating to their existing neighboring buildings. And so we had initially written some guidelines around that, and the steering committee determined that, again, to that enforceability issue, that those would be more appropriately handled as a zoning code text amendment. And then after the public workshop, or the public open house rather, a question came up regarding driveway widths, which we also drafted some language for. So, so the first recommended zoning code amendment would apply to sections 400.1320.d3 and 400.1330.d3, which are the yard and setback requirements in both the A and B single-family zoning districts. Currently, the code states that the minimum front yard is 25 feet. However, as I'm sure most of you know, most of the existing buildings in Brentwood have a fairly consistent alignment on the streets. And so we are recommending that the minimum front yard be actually changed to a relational build-to line, which would state that is measured perpendicular to the front lot line, equal to the average distance of the setback of the two existing homes on either side of the subject property. So the average front setback of 4 existing homes in total, plus or minus 2 feet, with the exception that if there are less than 2 existing homes on one side of the subject property, an additional building on the other side shall be included in the average, so the average front setback of 4 existing homes is achieved. So that would be a fairly significant text amendment, because you are fundamentally changing the definition of the front yard, of the minimum front yard or front yard setback, and you're changing it to a relational build-to-line strategy. The next recommended amendment deals with front access garages. And so this would apply to sections 400, 1320 D5 and 1330 D5, which again apply to the A and B single-family residential districts. And so this adds some language dealing with driveways and off-street parking. So for front access garages, the language is changed to state that the driveway may not be wider than 48 inches as measured at the main opening width of the door, but retaining in no event shall the driveway exceed 40% of the front or rear yard in which the driveway is located. So that's the amount of distance that the driveway may be wider than the garage door is increased from 24 to 48 inches. That was in response to some specific input that we heard from residents relative to driveways that have retaining walls and a desire for residents to be able to park and still open the doors comfortably next to the retaining walls. And then through the steering committee process, we heard input that for side and rear access garages, the driveway, an even more flexible range should be approved, or should be considered. So there's language added that says that for side and rear access garages, the driveway may be not wider than the width of the garage plus 8 feet as measured at the main opening. So again, for a side or rear access, you could essentially get a parking apron next to the garage door. And then finally, in sort of the same spirit as the first amendment for the relational build-to line for the front yard, we developed language for section 400 1870B, which is the yard requirements dealing with corner lots. So it's revised to state that any corner lot shall have a side street setback equal to the average distance of the setback of the nearest 2 existing homes fronting on the side street plus or minus 2 feet. So again, changing it slightly from the minimum front yard setback of any adjoining lot to actually keying it to the existing, the location of the facade of the existing buildings. So those, so that would constitute 5 total sections of the zoning code that are recommended for amendment based on input that we received throughout the planning process. The final thing I'll mention is floor area ratio limits. So this did come up early on in the process, and as I'm sure you all know, floor area ratio, you take the total occupiable floor area of the building, sometimes with exceptions, divide it by the total area of the lot as a means to limit building size. We are not recommending establishing an FAR limit either in the guidelines or as a zoning text amendment. We always recommend that if there is a desire to limit building size, it be done through dimensional standards because the dimensional standards can result in predictable building forms, and FAR limits do not result in predictable building forms. It's simply a mathematical calculation. It does not really deal with the form or the shape of the building or where the mass is located. So we did not feel that, given the other design guidelines and the recommendations for zoning code updates, that an FAR limit would be useful. We think that the the issues of overscale buildings are addressed through other means. So that, of course, is something that we can reconsider, but we were asked to consider it, and in our opinion, it does not make sense just due to the lack of predictability.
I think Mr. Turner has a question, but just one thing real quick. Ms. Kelly, for staff, and we obviously not voting, but the equivalent of staff report. Has staff and city attorney reviewed the text amendments, and are you, what's the general take on those? See, I'm getting better at it.
Turned off my camera. I have looked at them. I do have some questions that would certainly be further reviewed and discussed at the time we look at these text amendments. Completely eliminating a front yard setback might be difficult, but allowing for some variation with the existing form, especially for a lot of the pre-existing non-conforming homes would be nice. Yeah.
Solve a different problem, so
Yeah.
understood. Mr. Turner.
So one of my questions was going to be kind of a combo of Whitney question versus maybe this showed up in your public survey system. How many times have you had a problem with the front yard setback?
Not really at all, except for those homes that are pre-existing and they had to require a variance,
Okay.
which required prior
Variances,
to
yeah.
review at the ARB. So it hasn't been a lot, but there are a few pre-existing non-conforming homes.
So, I mean, from the ARB standpoint, we've had an issue with front yard setback maybe once or twice. And it usually has to do with somebody wanting to put a porch in front of the setback, which there are requirements, which I think are perfectly reasonable. And I see no need to change that particular issue one way or another because this adds a lot of extra front-end work for the surveyor to do, which the owner then has to pay for. So I don't see any benefit or need out of it. I mean, that's my opinion from being on the side that reviews and uses it at the same time. Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to add that for your knowledge, ARB does look at where the existing homes are. So if someone's placed a home at the 25-foot setback, but the existing homes are more at 30 feet or 28 feet, they kind of look to push it back to be more consistent with that. We can look at the time we get into any text amendments, we can certainly look at clarifying that.
And I'm fine with that being a relational statement in the architectural guidelines rather than a zoning change, because again, I understand what you're saying about the FAR, and that was the second part of my question, or a secondary question that I have, which is, what are your recommendations on how to address the oversized house? Because that is a number one complaint we get from the public on buildings we review, of which there's one on my street right now, which is the largest house on the street and is the smallest lot on the street and towers over its neighbors. But as a board, we say it's allowed by zoning. It was never addressed by the subdivision covenants ahead of time because they never expected anybody to build that big of a house. So I would love to hear what you guys recommend.
So what what has come up or what came up through the discussion with primarily with the steering committee and also at the public open house, a lot of the issues relating to oversized buildings seem to come down to issues of either the first floor elevation above existing grade is noticeably higher than the neighbors. So maybe you have a 4-foot projection of the basement as opposed to a 2.5 or 3-foot projection, or the floor heights themselves of the building are much taller. You're on a street where you've got 8 or 8.5 foot floor to floor, or floor to floor, and you coming in with 10, or probably in most cases the roof pitch. And the thing is, an FAR limit would not address any of those. So the guidelines include language that basically tasks the ARB with looking at floor-to-floor heights, ground floor elevation, and roof pitch in relation to neighboring buildings, and that they should be compatible with neighboring buildings. So that's in, for instance, in oh, pardon me. In Section C, new home massing and placement, building configuration and massing, building height. The height above grade of the new home sill plate, floor plates, and eave line should be within 1 foot of those of the one existing neighboring homes on each side. Street-facing facades, massing, roof line, eaves. There's recommendations for that. So it's really, it becomes it's really a design issue as opposed to a gross floor area issue. And so that's why we didn't feel that the floor area ratio limits would be particularly helpful. But we wanted to provide some specific guidance in the guidelines themselves to the ARB and as well as to applicants of what is expected and how new projects will be reviewed.
So the height, though, is that, I mean, when I read this, I was strictly reading it as the first floor plate. Does this apply to the second floor plate as well? And then what do you do when your neighboring house is a one-story house?
So is this on page 8?
Let me scroll down to the bottom here. Yes, it is on page 8.
Yeah, so basically, so it's sill plate, floor plates, and eave line should be within 1 foot of those of the one existing neighboring home on each side. So if you were building a 2-story building next to a 1-story building, generally speaking, the second floor plate of the new 2-story building should be roughly in line with the eave line. If it's a 9-foot floor to ceiling height of the 1-story building, should be looking at a roughly 9-foot floor to ceiling height, of the new building on the first floor. So not to say that you can't have 2-story buildings next to 1-story buildings, but it's more to keep the proportion of the building elements in line with the prevailing conditions on the street or on the block.
So, I mean, as a clear guideline for the end user, I know how I will approach it, which will be not what people will be happy with. So, because we run into, one of the bigger issues we run into, a lot of the original homes, the indentures called for minimum of 7'6" second floor height, and a lot of them have a 7'6" second floor height. And so when you have a 7'6" on the second floor and 8 foot on the first floor, and it's got possibly a 2x10 or a 2x8 floor framing, which is seldom used nowadays, it's a much lower house.
Right.
And so we build houses with 10-foot first floors and 9-foot second floors. And if there's a little clearer way to explain to developers and new homeowners or renovators that we want that size brought back down and to address the houses next door, I would like to see it a little clearer.
Yeah, I mean, probably the clearest way to do it would be, and again, this would be a question of whether this is part of a zoning text amendment or whether it's part of the architectural design guidelines, would be to just specify a ground floor and upper floor height limit. You just say that, ground floors cannot be any taller than X number of feet, and upper floors. And I mean, that would be probably the most straightforward way of doing it. I'm trying to think of, I personally would think that a relational system would be better, and maybe the language is not clear enough, but.
I mean, it's just, to me, it just needs a little bit to represent that it's more than the first floor, and it's a relationship of the overall height in relationship to the adjacent property and its ridge lines. I mean, if you happen to run into a one-story flat roof house, which we don't I don't know that we have any, but we might.
Yeah.
You know, and how do you address that in infill? I mean, obviously, if you're all new construction, you tear down 5 houses, which we've had, it's a different issue.
Yeah.
But,
I do think it does address roof forms for that particular one, but yeah, I agree. What I see here is first floor, and then I see that anything else would be conforming to the height limitations of the zoning code. So I think that second floor does matter. I mean, it's
Okay.
a
Yeah.
wall-to-wall build.
We can address that, clarify that language.
And I would, I know, one of the goal. I'll be quick, I promise. One of the goals for having the guidelines. Whoa, that is so trippy. One of the goals for having the guidelines was because some of these discussions, like is happening tonight, get really extremely detailed and nuanced, and sometimes not everybody needs or wants to get into that level of detail. However, we as architectural professionals, that's kind of what we do, so we have to do that, and it's appropriate for the discussions at the ARB. So the thought is that these guidelines would help streamline some of those discussions. And then just I'll leave this here relative to the FAR. It is a zoning issue, so it is a planning and zoning issue, so it maybe doesn't have to be fully discussed in this context any further. I would say that in addition to the dimensional requirements you're describing, the FAR, as I've had to deal with it in other jurisdictions, and honestly, in almost every other jurisdiction that I've worked in, there's been an FAR requirement, right? And so I understand the logic that you're spinning out about how they work. I think the thing that we've dealt with a few times, is what I'd call envelope fillers, right? So there's a setback on the side, a setback on the side, a setback in the back, and a setback in the front, and then the building is just going to fill that envelope. And sometimes, no matter what you do in terms of design detail or datum lines from other homes, it's going to be a massive construction, right? So I think we as a planning and zoning board, which was where that would be handled, have to decide, is that something we're okay with, right? And my own personal feeling is FAR is actually a tool of flexibility. It's not a tool of restriction, because how I fill the allowable space is then sort of up to me as an architect and an owner. But it does preserve the sense that there might be some space around the building, and that we just have an envelope to envelope, like an urban condition, right? We have a primarily suburban condition. We could have this discussion in a different forum, but envelope filling buildings tend to be ones you just would think of an urban situation, right? Like, and so there's, I think, other restrictions that are similar. There's permeable paving percentages, right? There's tree removal, rules and things. So, I've traditionally thought that we're actually quite lenient here in Brentwood relative to things like FAR. So I maybe think it's still on the table, but not necessarily for this discussion. Thank you.
Appreciate it, Mr. Carlin. Mr. Nolan, Mr. Hunt, any questions? Recognizing we are about an hour, and I do appreciate taking the time tonight since we are in a non-business meeting, but I think this was really useful. I appreciated getting more of the background. I will say a couple of things there as well, and then obviously I apologize because I called you out and then started talking. From a layperson's perspective, I appreciated the examples. I believe all those were from Brentwood. I recognize some of the homes there. I appreciated that. I think that makes it clearer in those spaces. And reiterate the fact that just like we do with text amendments, we want to get it as close to right as we can, and I appreciate the input on that, recognizing that there'll be some change down the road as we fill out some of those details. But Mr. Hunt, Mr. Nolan, any comments or?
No comments. I've had my say in some other discussions.
Appreciate it. Mr. Nolan?
No comments, but I echo what you said. I appreciate the presentation. And that one house is on St. Clair. It's just down the street.
No naming and shaming, Mr. Nolan. Thank you very much. Really appreciate your time this evening. Appreciate the presentation and look forward to hearing some of it again, although we will shortcut that for our members who weren't able to make it tonight a little bit. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Any non-business for us, Ms. Kelly?
We do have several applications for the June 11th meeting, so please mark your calendars. They are rather larger projects. Couple of conditional use permits reviews.
I like projects.
All right.
Good deal. Since we're not officially meeting, we probably have no need to officially adjourn. But anyway, thanks everyone for their time tonight. I appreciate it and appreciate the discussion, and I look forward to seeing you on July 11th.